Good evening. On behalf of the World Affairs Committee, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's lecture and let you know about a couple of events we have upcoming. On November 1st, we're going to have Trudy Rubin speaking on global justice and human rights at 8 p.m., and I believe that's in the Sunroom. And next week at 4 p.m. in C.Y. Stevens, John McCain's going to be here as a guest of the television show Hardball. We'd like you all to attend, maybe ask some questions, but at least make it look like we here in Iowa care about our politics. Tonight, our program is going to be introduced by Dr. Stephen Schmidt from the Political Science Department.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks to all of you for coming. Just want to remind you, American government class, yellow feedback slips over there for discussions in class, and Latin American politics, blue feedback slips, and they're by the door. So if you don't have one now, you can get one on your way out. It's really a great pleasure for me to introduce our speaker tonight. He was one of my students. I remember him very fondly, and then he disappeared for about 25 years. And I suddenly got an email and a communication from him just this summer, and he said, I'd like to invite you to come to the Air War College because we have a forum on international policy and international security. And so I had an opportunity to spend a week at Maxwell Air Force Base with a lot of professors and scholars and the Secretary of the Air Force and others who kind of laid out the scenario for global security, for international threats, and for the potential role that the United States would have to play in all of those. And it was a terrific experience, and I was a member of a small seminar that our guest tonight was the president of, and they were officers from the different services and were all incredibly bright people and very committed and interested in their careers and, of course, concerned about the global situation as we face it today. So it's you can read up from the flyer that you have. Colonel Evelio Otero, who is our guest, is chief for the Sovereign Nations Engagement Plan for the Special Operations Command. He was in the U.S. Central Command. He is in the area of intelligence, and as you know, it's an area in which we need to improve our capacity in the United States. If nothing else, the recent detonation of perhaps a nuclear bomb or a nuclear test device in North Korea tells us once again that we need to improve our intelligence because we're still not sure it was actually a nuclear device that was detonated. And he spent some time in both Iraq and Afghanistan, was a member of General Tommy Frank's staff, and is involved in some very interesting new missions that the United States is assigning to its military forces. And the title of his speech tonight kind of summarizes that. So this is kind of state of the arts of where the United States needs to move and would like to move. Coalition building and U.S. national security policy. And I'm very, very pleased to bring back to Iowa State a great fan of the Cyclones and someone who truly loves this university, Colonel Evelio Otero.
You know, I had a flashback earlier. In this room, back in 1981, I was with a bunch of kids right here on the right-hand side, my right-hand side, your left-hand side. And we were all trying for West Side Story for Visha. And I sucked. But I actually got a role. I couldn't sing. I was all right with the movement, but I was all right with the dancing, I meant. But I was okay with the acting. So I was picked, I was selected. There were about 100 people and 30 people were chosen, and it was right in this room. And some of those folks went on to do great things. There were the Roth sisters. One of them became a choreographer for Disney. And she's in movies and so on. It if I could tell you that I am honored to be here is an understatement. I graduated on May 26, 1982 from Iowa State University, and at the time, I had no idea what was going to happen with my life. I knew that I was going to graduate that day, and I knew that I was going to be in the military. I got commissioned that morning by, at the time, Colonel Crow, and we have one of his followers here, our dear friend, the commander of the Air Force ROTC detachment, of which I'm a graduate of, Detachment 250. So at the time, I had no idea what was going to happen. Years go by, and I had friends that were in the football team at the time, which was pretty good. Darren Longshore, Kenny Neal, Larry Crawford, Dwayne Crutchfield. I don't know if those names ring any bells to you. Probably not. But they did to me. They were great friends of mine, and we decided a couple of times to come here. We planned to come here and scrimmage the football team, but we were all in our late 30s and old and decrepit and nasty. And we didn't think it would be a good idea to get pummeled by 19 and 20-year-olds, and we decided against it, and I continued doing my labor in the military. I will say that having graduated from Iowa State University did present wonderful opportunities and really expand my way of looking at things. As you can tell by my name, I don't know if you can pick up from it, it's Spanish. I know. I mean, it's difficult to tell, isn't it? And at the time, there were 15 guys at the university with the Spanish surnames like that, out of 25,000. Wow. Yet I was in a fraternity. I was a Theta Chi. Any Theta Chi's here? Okay. And I was a senator with a student body, and it did open up the ways on dealing with the world in ways that I didn't think I was going to be able to, coming from Puerto Rico at the time. So needless to say, when that put me at a certain level in 1983 as a flight commander in Italy, in charge of an intelligence unit of 160 people. And one night at 1 o'clock in the morning, I was on duty with my 160 fellows. And my senior non-commissioned officer calls me up and tells me, Lieutenant, it's 1983. After all, a long year of career training and all that, he says, sir, the Marine barracks have been bombed in Beirut. We got the communications from the Hezbollah reporting internally within Hezbollah that the Marine barracks have been blown up. And it had been a successful mission. And they were pretty much determined that there were casualties, American casualties. That was the first time in my career in uniform in which my heart cried. But at the same time, I had 3 minutes at the time, and perhaps my friend will remember how this reporting processes will go on. I had 3 minutes to notify the White House. And we notified the White House, and we woke up. At the time, a young officer, general, one-star general named Colin Powell. Colin Powell was the executive military advisor to then Caspar Weinberger. And we sent the message not by email. We sent the message. See, there you go. There's a clash of cultures, generations at its finest. And we sent the message. We notified. We woke them up. The president was woken up. And about 20 years later, I'm reading in the book by Colin Powell, in which he does mention that one night when he was woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and to be told that the Marine barracks had been blown up and there were American casualties, Marines that were casualties. All of a sudden, let me tell you, you grow up very quickly. And that was the first time in which I actually was able to add things together and see how young men and women, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23-year-olds, grow up that fast from being young, thriving, bright-eyed, young men and women to full-grown men and women in full appreciation of what this country's role is and what role they play in this world. And soon after that, there were other things. Fast forward, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iraq, Afghanistan. That has been in the back of my head for the past 6 years. But let it be said that on September 10th at 1 o'clock in the morning, I woke up in the middle of the night, September 10th, getting ready to go to work. I had to be at work at 5 o'clock in the morning. I was in charge of preparing some papers for a congressional delegation that was going to come and visit U.S. Central Command at the time. And as you know, that is a pain in the ass to prepare and make sure that everything is in order for every single one of these gentlemen and their respective staffs. And I did it. He was all ready to go. We went over on September 10th. On September 11th, I am at work at 6 o'clock in the morning. Mr. Karl von Clausewitz, the great military strategist, the theorist from 19th century, was playing games in my head at the time, just like he was with every other military person, because that's how we're trained, under his thoughts and those of Sun Tzu in his book, The Art of War. That's how military folks in the United States are trained. You follow the dictum of those two individuals, those two great thinkers. So September 11th, I'm in my office at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm preparing, making sure that everything is fine. I had a lovely staff of 3 people. No stress. It's a great thing. I was what I was looking at the end of my career. I was a lieutenant colonel. And I've done very well so far, below the zone promotion. I was looking at retiring a year after that, as most of us do think at that point. 8 o'clock in the morning, we were called to a meeting, every morning meeting with General Franks, to discuss regular things. We were supposed to brief General Franks at 9 o'clock in the morning. I was on my desk. I was in charge of the intelligence operations branch. And in any operations, anything, when you see the name operations in a title, you have a TV set in a military environment. There's always a TV set on, either on Fox or CNN. It is part of your requirement as a professional military operations officer. And I'm looking at the TV, and I see an airplane slam against the World Trade Center. Within seconds, they had experts on TV talking about, well, you know, it must have been an accident, it must have been the weather, the guy didn't know what he was doing, it may have been a small plane. And we were all gathering around the TV set. And shortly thereafter, the second airplane hits. It was an overwhelming reaction in toto. Everybody knew that we were under attack. My life as a professional changed totally. I was in the epicenter of war. And I had been in the military since 1983. Went through Desert Storm, yes. Traumatic, like any war. But this was different. We all smelled that this was going to be something in which nobody in uniform would be able to define it in the rest of their life with a victory parade in New York City or any small town. There was not going to be any victory parades. We knew that. We went to brief General Franks. General Franks, as I say, up to September 10th was a lovely, lovely man. Hey, how you doing, Evelio? Down the hallway. September 11th, he became the meanest son of a bitch you ever met. And I'm glad. That is the kind of officer, that is the kind of general you wanted in charge. You don't want somebody that is going to be let himself pushed around by second guessers, third guessers. You give him the information and he takes charge. And you press forward with it. Mistakes were made. But the one thing that General Franks did say, and it was visionary, it was that we cannot go forward, we cannot move on unless we include other countries. And I remember in the discussions with General Franks at the time, my general and the generals around me, and some colonels, the discussion was, Colin Powell, 1991, you cannot win a war if the will of the people is not supporting you. If the world is not supporting you, you gotta have the support of the people. You gotta have the support of the world. Clausewitz, all of a sudden, was rolling in his grave. Because if any of you have read Clausewitz and his treatise on war, he never mentions post-major conflict operations. He talks about the fog of war. He talks about his espionage. He talks about taking any necessary measures to defeat the enemy, but never about the military role in a post-conflict environment. Everything that we were doing at the time was upside down. The plan, the war plan, we pulled it out of the shelf. We pulled several plans out of the shelf. That one day we pulled the one out of the shelf. We had indications that Al-Qaeda was part of this affair. We had pretty reliable information that Al-Qaeda did it. We had sources that verified it, and there was no denial. Then the Taliban government sent a memo stating that if any action was taken by Al-Qaeda within their country, that they would support it. Because they understand where Al-Qaeda is coming from. It was very difficult to reconcile that with the deaths of 3,000 people and 80 countries represented in those 3,000 people, and every religion represented in all of those people. And it was very difficult when you were at Central Command watching the film. And if I say something that bothers you, please let me know and I will continue. When you saw pictures of people falling off the building, close up, and slamming on a mother with a baby, and killing both, you get real pissed. And all of a sudden you find yourself that you're the one that has the power to plan and decide what do we do against these individuals. We responded to the Taliban government. We told them that it will not be acceptable for the United States, for Afghanistan, to give shelter to a terrorist group like Al-Qaeda, who took responsibility for these acts. When all that was going on, I have in front of me a series of plans opened. None of them included coalition operations. None of them included our friends in the area, our allies, if you will. Right off the bat, there was a perfunctory mention about them. We need to consult them. Any plan, any military plan since the beginning of time always has a mention consulting with the allies. But if the sovereign country, which is the United States in this case, determines that the threat is such that we will act unilaterally, we would. So there was no question. We're going to go through whatever our friends and allies say or not. And when he came back to my office, we were torn because the rules of engagement as we knew them did not apply. We were not talking about a uniformed enemy. We were not talking about a building with a Ministry of Defense. We were not talking about guards walking around. That was part of it in the government of Afghanistan. But Al-Qaeda, that wasn't the case. We were talking about Al-Qaeda cells in friends of the United States, cells hidden in cells, hidden in countries that are friends of the United States throughout the world. How do you deal with those? Can I pick you as an enemy because you're in Afghanistan? You are in the same group of this guy here, but I cannot hit you because you're living in a friendly country. Rules of engagements are thrown out the window. How do we make this happen? So we started talking to our coalition friends. But first of all, we had to determine the definitions of what coalitions were. But before I go on, I just wanted to show you some pictures of Afghanistan and Iraq. There's about 3 of what coalition became and what coalition is today. What we have here is an Iraqi military police with American soldiers walking down in Baghdad. That relationship that we have with that country is terrific. They're our coalition friends. That we're working with them. That's the end result of effective coalition operations. In this picture here, what you have on the left is a Polish officer. On the right-hand side is an Iraqi military officer, and in the center is an American officer getting ready to go and conduct operations in Fallujah. You've heard about Fallujah, haven't you? Probably nothing good. There's a lot of good things going on in Fallujah. Every school is working. And this one I just threw it in there because I thought it was interesting. On the left is a Polish soldier, and on the right-hand side is an Iraqi soldier telling it's an American Humvee, just so you know. And the Iraqi soldier is telling the Polish soldier how the American Humvee works in the carburetor. That's a cute picture. And of course, the one that everybody wants to see at some point or another. This is classic. We have an American soldier on the left behind an Afghani soldier. On the right, we have a British soldier behind an Afghani soldier. And on the far right, we have an Australian soldier behind an Afghani soldier. So these are the definitions that we had to deal with when we were making the decision on how to engage in coalition operations. What the hell is an alliance? What is a coalition? What is a partnership? And we decided at the time that, listen, we really don't have time to pontificate and pull our hairs about what is this thing. The only reference that we have for alliances is that they are formal signed agreements. All right? We are in a situation in which we don't have a formal signed agreement to defend or act or attack anything. It was a result of the attack against the Twin Towers. So then we decided, okay, what about coalitions? And that was my definition as proposed to the J5, the Plans and Policy Directorate at Central Command. I wrote a point paper in which I defined coalitions as a group of countries coming together to defeat an enemy for common goals and objectives without a permanent structure of a signed alliance. And at the time it was accepted, it was implemented, and coalition all of a sudden became part of the everyday vocabulary for everybody. So I bet you that every single person in this room, when you think about coalitions, you don't think about Survival, the TV show, doing coalitions with another tribe. When you think about coalitions, you think about Afghanistan and Iraq. And you think folks in uniform. That's where it came from. That was the intent, and we succeeded. Perhaps a little bit too well. Because then we were challenged with, what do we do with the future? Is coalition the future of military engagement? If we have to get involved in, pick a country, Indonesia, Spain, Italy, France, Colombia, Mexico, wherever you may have a threat, a terrorist threat against this country, how do you deal with that enemy? You cannot do it with a coalition. The coalition term does not apply because it's global. It's not limited anymore to one goal. The goal is like an amoeba. It starts changing. The threat to this country may be Al-Qaeda guys hiding in a back alley getting ready to, setting up a bomb to blow up the palace of Malacanang in the Philippines. Or you can have a group of folks in this other country and their whole purpose in life is to walk around in not uniforms, but in suit and ties, and utilizing the financial institutions within that country as money laundering for billions of dollars in support of Al-Qaeda or any other terrorist organization. It's not Al-Qaeda anymore. It is terrorism. So coalition does not apply. We had to come up with another term. That became partnership. Simple, but very adequate. Partnership is a common goal driven and where the warrior diplomat thrives. And the warrior diplomat are individuals such as Tommy Franks, or in the past, if you think about it, General Patton, or General Montgomery, or the greatest of them all up until General Franks, General Eisenhower, Ike Eisenhower. These are individuals that took their roles as warriors very, very seriously. But they also understood that in order for the military objectives to move forward, they had to take on roles of a diplomat. They had to sit down and have coffees and come to common understandings of what the threat to the sovereignty of both countries are. So from now on, if any of you get on the internet and Google anything that has to do with coalition or military engagements in the future, you're going to see two terms: partner nations and sovereignty. Respect for the sovereignty of the country. Once you have that, you have a partner. If that partner understands that the terrorist threat against that country, it is a threat against its sovereignty. I just want to show you a few examples of what I mean by the differences of these terms. When it comes to alliances, we have World War I, classic, obvious. Everybody knows about it. Lord knows we have seen enough movies about World War I. We have World War II. We have the Korean conflict. Many of you had grandparents here that were members of that. And all of these countries evolved into what is called NATO. It's a very sexy name, NATO. It's a lovely building in Europe. I mean, that everybody wants to get, anybody in uniform wants to get an assignment there because it's cool. That's NATO. And all the things that come with the title. The Supreme Allied Commander, European Forces. Oh my Lord, that's a big name. That was Ike Eisenhower's first title. That's NATO. And then you have SEATO, Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. The same goal as NATO. Not as sexy, not as well known, but just as effective. And all those evolved into the Organization of American States and the United Nations, which originally failed with the League of Nations. It became the United Nations. So all these are lovely alliances. And the reason why I include United Nations in there is because the United Nations, the only alliance engagement that they ever had was the Korean conflict. It was a military engagement by United Nations forces, blessed by United Nations, with United Nations helmets. It hasn't been repeated since or before. After that, we moved on to the coalitions. Coalitions, what we know about coalitions, it became very notable for everybody during Desert Storm in 1991. But for your generation and for our country, remember, Desert Storm they called it the 100-hour war. It was actually 4 or 5 months, something like that. But the air campaign was 100 hours and we just decimated them. And then it faded. And we had the parades and all that. But then we had Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan, followed by Operation Iraqi Freedom. Those are coalitions. There is a common goal. Now we have partner nations. Partner nations is what we're dealing with right now, and this is what we have to work with from now till the end of time, as we know it. Anybody in this room that will work at any political level, civilian or military, you're in the process, you're in a transition period right now. You're going to be facing documents that talk about coalitions. And the same document later on at the bottom, it says partner nations. Who do we engage in partner nations? Partner nation is common. It's a common term at the planning level, but not yet at the operational level. We're in a process of transition, like I said. Partner nations, as it applies carefully and efficiently, is when it comes to the global war on terror. Global war on terror. That is partner nations. It's global. It is globally used. And what I mean by globally used, I mean every country that feels its sovereignty threatened by a terrorist or by a common enemy tends to use the term partner nations when addressing us. I'm the government of Malaysia. I think that the threat to Malaysia is whatever. I need the assistance of our partner nations. And when you look at the appendix of the document, it says United States and a list of other countries. So we are a partner nation, so it is a commonly used name throughout the world. And so far, up to these days, is limited to a planning stage, to a war planning stage. But what is a global war on terror? Well, the global war on terror is, first time ever, it is the toughest challenge to military, strategic, doctrinal thinking in history. And I gave you a little window to what that was earlier. This is the first time in which we have to think beyond the actual engagement, beyond the actual conflict. When I was in Iraq, it was a very strange feeling when everything that I did and everything that I thought and I wrote would have an effect on the civilian population, would have an effect on the government. When we were drafting how we were going to handle the Ministry of the Interior in Iraq, and my office were making the recommendations for how to build the Ministry of the Interior, and that morning I was at an ambush. It's not a pretty thing. Believe me, I can assure you that when you get ambushed, or if you're in a plane you get shot or whatever, in a military engagement, and that evening you have to be just as calm and normal and go on with your everyday business and draft a plan that will affect the future of a country, you better have a clear mind. So it is a challenge. It is not like it was in World War I. If you go in history, my friends, you will look in World War I, we lost 1 million men in World War I. It was understood that that's the way it would be. It was understood that we're going into World War II, we're going to lose about 1 million men. Actually, we lost more in World War I. But in World War II, we were going to lose about 1 million men, and your grandparents, your great-grandparents, hey, that's a great generation. All of you have heard that. 1 million men dead. In the Pacific, in the war in the Pacific, during World War II, there's 50,000 American service members still missing in action. 50,000. That's what it was understood. In Japan, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, leveled. Berlin, leveled. Today, they're our best friends. And they were our best friends shortly thereafter. Because it was understood, military doctrine understood that that's the way things work. That's what happens. But we evolved. I don't know if we're evolving into the Star Trek mode of thinking in which, peaceful and all that. Lord knows that would be great. But we certainly have evolved from that to Vietnam, in which it was losing was not an option and we retreated. We lost 50,000 lives there, and you have a whole generation of men in their 50s and 60s who are scarred by it. Some of you relatives of yours. They lost 50,000 men. We cry about them. We feel them. They tug to our hearts every day and every night when we talk about military conflicts. We always refer back to the disaster of Vietnam, and we tend to forget about World War I, World War II, and even Korea. We tend to forget about that. And then we put it in the perspective of Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom. You can't measure one against the other. How many times do you folks have seen on TV comparing Iraq and Afghanistan to Vietnam? Raise your hands. How many of you have heard that? God, that pisses me off. I am glad that you folks are attuned to that. I am glad, it gives me pleasure to know that. But it bothers me because from a military perspective and a political perspective, it's different. In Vietnam, we retreated, we lost, and we didn't lose to the guerrilla. We didn't lose to the insurgents. Anybody that has memory here of that period of time, and some of you do here, will remember, looking at you, my friend, will remember that when we left Saigon, what rolled into the cities of Saigon were tanks, northern Vietnamese tanks, not insurgents, not Viet Cong hiding on caves. It was tanks. It was a military force. And we lost. We retreated. It was a military entity. In Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom, it's global war on terror. It's a global animal, and it is not that clear. And we don't have the option to pull and retreat right now. As far as military planning, as far as my job, I cannot give the option to my boss. And believe me, if I were you and I were to stand here in front of you and tell you, oh, by the way, I give General Tommy Franks the option that we need to retreat, shoot me. Because I just failed you. It is not an option. You're paying for my thinking to give you a successful campaign. Are we going to have a successful campaign in all levels? No guarantees about that. But I certainly can guarantee you that whatever we do, whatever we think about, is going to take into consideration that we're going to succeed. But it's also going to take into consideration the fact that there is no playbook on how to conduct the war that we're in right now. And we have to consider our coalition friends to win that war. Globalization is upon us, even in the military sense. You pick up your phone and you call Dell Computers customer service, and some guy answers you. Test this. I did it, and it did happen. A guy named Steve answered the phone. I said, Steve, where are you? I'm in Austin, Texas. I said, are you, let me ask you a question. Is Austin north or south of Dallas? Pause. I don't know. I said, all right, tell me the truth. Where are you? I'm in Bangalore, India. That's globalization at its finest. It's no threat to anybody. It's just pure capitalism. They're just making a living. And we're hiring people that they do a very good job. And he did a very good job helping me with my computer. I'm not knocking that. But it is globalization. And the military is no exception. Unilateral operations by military forces are in the past. Any responsible military officer that my friend here is training today, when he gets commissioned tomorrow, he has to respond to his seniors and he has to start thinking in terms of future coalition operations. We're witnessing political and military history. That's simple. You're witnessing it. Forget about all the previous examples that you have from all these other conflicts. This is new. 1004 Victor. Anybody knows what 1004 Victor is? Don't say it. Anybody here knows what 1004 Victor is? Look in the internet. It is the name given to the plan for Operation Iraqi Freedom. When we were told, let's look at Operation Iraqi Freedom. And we pulled it off and we started looking at it. It was a purely military operation, and it was the last military operation as we know it. We're looking at a long and protracted war. Your grandparents and great-grandparents knew that when it came to World War II. They knew that they were in for the long haul. Anybody here that have any conversation with your grandparents or great-grandparents reference World War II, they will tell you that when you left to a deployment, it's not like in the Air Force today. Air Force people, when we deploy for 90 days. We have rotations of 90 days. The Army has rotations of 6 months. There are exceptions to the rule, like me, and some other of my friends, which we had 18 months deployment. is nasty after about a month and not taking a shower. But that's the reality. And when you talk to your grandparents or your great-grandparents, they will tell you that they were not ready for 3 months rotation, 6 months rotation. They looked at you and they said, "What's that? You were drafted, you do what we tell you to do." And many of them, they said goodbye to their wives, they said goodbye to their girlfriends, and many of them had deployments for 2 years. Some of them for however long the war lasted, 3 years. And they were willing to understand that. Today we have a very difficult time. We have a globalized generation. We are the fast generation. We are the 24/7 news generation. Back then they had to wait till the next day to get the news. And by the time they got the news from the battlefield, it was, I don't know, a month later or 3 weeks later. So it was like, oh well, it happened, nothing I can do. Right now you get it immediately. So that's a challenge. It is understood that it is impossible to defeat any enemy globally without partnerships from countries whose sovereignty is threatened. And why do I keep bringing sovereignty? You just keep saying, what this sovereignty, what the hell is this? Is that it is simple, my friends. And I'm going to put it in a very simple term for you. Since 2003, then National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice, she says, every instance of support from every country, no matter how small or large, is helping to win this war, and everyone is valued. That is the first time in which dictum, blessing, here you go, press on with engaging other countries, discussing other countries, how we're going to fight this war together. Many countries did not want to join at first. I don't know if I really want to do this. It is too threatening. I don't want to get my ass kicked by the Taliban in Afghanistan. And I really don't have that big of a force. I only have 3 policemen in my country. There's a country like that. I'm not joking. There was. When I was in charge of the coalition village at U.S. Central Command, I was baffled. I just took off my hat to this gentleman and I said, "You're my hero. You got 3 policemen in your country. That's the amount of your force and 1 Mako fast boat." And he wanted to go and fight. To a point. I mean, he couldn't go and fight. But he certainly said, "I'll be more than happy to provide my brains for the planning of this operation." I said, "You're more than welcome, my friend. What I need you to do, I cannot involve you in every piece of the process. You understand that? But what I need you to do, I need you to tell me what you know about Afghanistan. What do you know about the Taliban? What do you know about any of Al-Qaeda elements in your country or in your region? Tell me about it." "Oh yes, I can do that. And as a matter of fact, I do have a snippet of information." I said, "Beautiful. Beautiful. Let's talk about that. But before we go on, I need guidance. I need solid guidance from the government that I can do this, that I can continue talking to my coalition friends." And a slew of documents decided to come down. And if you don't remember anything from this briefing, understand that there is guidance since 2003 defining from the top, from the White House, Joint Chief of Staff, Secretary of Defense, Department of State, etc., giving us the green light to start talking and considering with great respect our coalition friends. There were the National Military Strategy of 2004. It was the first time that a national military strategy said you have to consider coalition countries. You have to include them in your military planning. Then we had the National Defense Strategy from the Secretary of Defense in 2005, in which it says, not only do you have to include friends in your planning, but you damn have to include friends in your planning. Then we had the National Security Strategy of 2006, which determines and defines the whole security strategy for our country. And in February 2006, we honed it down to what we call the National Military Strategic Plan for the War on Terrorism. The military strategic piece, part of that document, breaks down for you how do we engage, how do we talk to our coalition friends. Anybody want to copy that? One thing that came up, and I'm sure everybody in this room have seen, is what is called Phase 4. Do you know what is Phase 4? Have you heard about it in the news? Phase 4 planning, post-conflict planning, reconstruction. Have you heard any of those terms? It's all the same. In a military planning, when you as a planner sit down and you decide how you're going to engage an enemy, you have Phase 0 to Phase 5. Phase 3 is a military conflict piece. And at Phase 3 is where you determine at what time and at what day you're going to have D-Day and A-Day and MOUSE and MICKUI and all that. You know, it's like that. And then you have Phase 4. And Phase 4 is like, okay, what are we going to do after the war is over? After major operations are considered over and we're just in maintenance role. What do we do? Anybody in the military will tell you, I don't know. We don't think in those terms. And we usually pass it on to the Department of State. Department of State throws the bone here. This is what we're talking about, building ministries and building embassies and electrical plants and water plants and schools and this and that. I'm going to let you guys do that. I'm going to stay in the lane here. And in Phase 4, what we're going to do is we're going to coordinate with that, and we're going to be okay with you and maybe not. We'll negotiate, see what happens. And, it never went anywhere. And we called it what it was, Phase 3/Phase 4. Because the war was a lot quicker than we thought. We thought we planned for a 6-month fighting. It was over in 2 months. Oh, shit. We have a museum broken. We have a hospital looted. We have troops still fighting. Yours truly, one of them, at Baghdad airport, trying to figure out what the hell is going on. Very confusing, to no fault of anybody. It is a learning piece. There is no perfect operation. Now we have to figure out what is it the Department of State wanted to do. And the Department of State came up with a great plan. They had a really good plan. And the plan involved sending what you came to see on TV as a CPA. Ambassador Bremer, remember that? How do you reconcile having a full Department of State civilian staff in a war zone in which you have 140,000 troops and 22 generals? Very difficult. Very challenging. What do the Iraqi people do? The Iraqi people, we work with them. The civil affairs folks are simply terrific. Those troops that you never see on TV, those are the guys that grabbed our coalition friends and understood what they provided. Grabbed the Nicaraguans. Do you know that we had Nicaraguans in Iraq? Anybody? We had 140 Nicaraguans in Iraq. What did those young, brave men from Nicaragua provided to the effort? Explosive ordnance disposal. They were clearing minefields for your brothers and sisters with American uniforms. They were doing that. El Salvador, same thing. Spain was in charge of a brigade in the south, multinational brigades. The Poles, they put the flag at half-staff, and the Romanians when President Reagan died, because they claimed that they figured that the freedom that they enjoyed was because of President Reagan. That's what they said. It's just amazing. They were under fire. They had soldiers killed. One. Oh, well, I read in the news. I read in the papers. Well, it was just one guy. It was page 7. One Polish guy. One Nicaraguan guy got blown up. 7 Spanish guys. Not as many as our 700 Americans that have died up to this day. God, that pissed me off. Because all of those soldiers, all of those coalition countries, they sat down with me and we decided with the plans and policy staff at Central Command what their roles were going to be. Some of them could have boots on the ground, some of them couldn't. And I heard in the news, well, boots on the ground, we really have only 22 countries. We have 140,000 troops, U.S. troops, and coalition countries, we have a total of 18,000. That's crap. This is not a true coalition, and too bad they're dying. But it's not as many as our guys dying. If you were to ask certain countries that I knew of, they were tracking Al-Qaeda cells in their country, taking them down, and police officers in large metropolitan cities of cities that you know and you have visited died in some of those raids. I consider those guys as much of a hero and as much of a participant of the coalition as myself, as my friend over here that is willing to go, or anybody that had been in Iraq. I take off my hat to all of them. Once you reach that point of respect to what the coalition brings to the table, then you get a better understanding of where we can go forward in the world as a group, as a unified force, because that's the future, a unified force. The thing about Phase 4 is that Phase 4 is driven by military and political thrust. And the military right now is starting to learn how to juggle both. And also, we need to learn how to transfer those lessons to our partners. But it's not only the U.S. It's also what they learn from it that they share with us. It is a report card on how we're doing for future engagements, not just for the United States, but also to any coalition country that is participant in an engagement with us. It's the same report card. They may call it phase whatever. It's still Phase 4 in our lingo. It's still reconstruction. And it's still a report card. How well do we do after the war? That being said, we come to the understanding of what are those challenges that we all of us face when it comes to coalition building. I mentioned to you Poland. I mentioned to you Nicaragua. I mentioned to you El Salvador. There's a boatload of other countries that have done a ton of things that you have heard about, some that you will never hear about, not because they were not willing and they were in disagreement with the United States. I assure you, my friends, some countries remain quiet in the media behind the scenes that were working with us full-blown, tracking people down in their countries. The threat that they felt was not just in Iraq and Afghanistan. The threat was also in their country and regionally, the country next door. When it comes to coalition building, we have to take into account what they bring to the table. And most of these countries, really, what they can bring to the table are special operations, direct action roles. Remember this. The hegemon in the world when it comes to military power is the United States. When the United States decides to move its military power, most countries think about it because it is very powerful machinery. But when it comes to other countries, they're very proud. Most countries are very proud of their special operations units. And they can be just as deadly. We're more technological. We have more money. Are we better when it comes to numbers and lethality? Perhaps we're more prepared. But when it comes to efficiency, they can be just as efficient as we are. They bring to the table a special operations, direct actions role. You guys know what direct action is? I'll tell you, direct action is where you take out an enemy. When you go over a hill, you know that there is a house over there with a bunch of bad guys building IEDs. We know they're there, we surround the house, we kick the door down, they're there, they shoot back at us, and they lose. Which is for the most part. The other thing that they bring to the table is civil military operations, explosive ordnance disposal, linguistic capabilities, and open source analysis. Key piece. If a country in the world doesn't do anything as far as providing a uniformed soldier or a uniform member, They may bring a tremendous capability to analyze what the enemy open media is saying, what the terrorist group websites are saying. Do you know? Do you know? Do you know? Do you know? Nobody here knows. But there are countries out there in which every citizen knows what they're saying. They know exactly what those websites are saying. Wouldn't you want to know what they think? I think so. And they're more than willing to help us because they understand. Some of these folks, they're threatened. Some are Muslim countries and they're threatened by some of these radicals. They don't want that. They're peace-loving people. And what they want to bring to the table is, what can I do to help you? I don't have the forces. And perhaps I cannot do this way, but I certainly can help you understanding what the websites are saying. And let me tell you, that can be just as efficient, and that can be maybe better than anything that I can do in a military planning session for months on end. The other challenge that we have when it comes to coalition planning is information sharing. We have a presidential directive in which it says, you will share information. You will discuss with the coalition everything that you have. But not all of them safeguard the information like we do. Let me explain what this means to you. I need you to understand this. This is life or death situation. If I have a source, if I am a person on the field, and I happen to be at a certain village, by the way, this is a personal example, and I'm in a village, this one guy comes to me and he says, you know, I like what you guys have been doing. You guys rebuild the school. You guys rebuild the well. Good for you. I appreciate it. And let me tell you, I happen to think that next door to my house, there are some guys moving in and out with explosives. Take him out. Well, it's not that easy. We need to check first. We need to make sure that it's not a vendetta. Then it's going to backfire. The process of engagement is very complicated. It's not CNN and it's not Fox News. Every element is thought of and considered. I cannot engage in a vendetta just because this guy wanted to. We have to think about, we have to decide. Once I get that information, I got to figure out, who do I share it with of my coalition countries? Some coalition countries may have spoken to me in private that they wanted to take these people out. They didn't care who was in that house. They don't have the same rules of engagement as we have. So, as you can see, I am in a situation in which I cannot share with everybody. I have to be selective in the coalition country that I share this information with, that I know that we can surround the house, that we can get that information, we can take it down and arrest the people or take them out if necessary, with no unnecessary injuries or not unnecessary destruction. So the sharing of information is key. Interoperability is also a very important piece. Do you guys know what is interoperability? If anybody knows, raise your hand. You know. Interoperability means radios talking to each other. That is the most common example. If I am the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Poland, Austria, and all my communication equipment, because of NATO, because under the auspices of NATO, that alliance that I talked to you about earlier, we're required to be able to talk to each other. That doesn't mean that I can do that with the guy from Malaysia. And I cannot just say, okay, everybody, let's go into this operation together. Let's go and do it. No, it doesn't happen. We've got to make sure that our equipments talk to each other. We've got to make sure that the ammunition can be used simultaneously. We can use it at the same time. We can exchange ammunition. We have similar equipment. We have the same calibers, etc., etc., etc. So that's a challenge to coalition building. It's not just everybody that wants to come to the table is welcome. We love them. They know we love them, but what do you bring in? And joint planning is ongoing, taking into consideration all these things. It's ongoing at all times. It never stops. There are broad and critical roles, like I mentioned earlier. Special operations forces. Like I have underlined, as you know, not all can fight on the ground. They provide unmanned aerial vehicles. You know what those unmanned aerial vehicles? You know what those unmanned aerial vehicles? You know what those